May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. The other day I get a text message from my daughter who was like, okay, you can pick me up now. She was playing with some of her friends. She's 14. And I said, where do I pick you up from? And she said, just come to Pinecrest Elementary School. We'll kind of be hanging out there. So I show up to the school, and there's like 15 teenagers. I can see them. It's dark. It's nighttime, hanging out in the parking lot. And I make sure to spot my daughter. And then I see her, and I'm like, all right, I'm like, this was like a spontaneous, like, I'm going to be the cool dad. That usually never ends up well, right? So I pull up the car by all these teenagers. I roll down my window, and I go, all right, y'all, break it up. And right as I said that, I noticed that the girl I thought was my daughter was not actually my daughter. And I actually didn't know any of the kids in that circle. And one of them goes, and so I thought they'd be intimidated by a dad saying break it up. She goes, wait, who are you? And I'm like, is Mary Ateek here? And they're like, no. And I was like, okay, carry on. And I just drove away in utter shame. I don't know why that stayed with me for 2 days. Just feeling super embarrassed. A bunch of teenagers, why should I care? And yet I did. I think you would agree that there is something about public humiliation in particular that gives a unique flavor to the experience of shame. As social animals who are hardwired for belonging, the experience of feeling like we're pushed to the outside of community, even if it's just for one embarrassing, fleeting moment, can elicit a high level of emotional distress. I don't think I'm telling you anything you all don't know or experience. But then you think of those whose entire existence, it feels, takes place on the outside of community. People who have been traditionally marginalized or excluded, those who don't fit the mold, for whom society is just another reminder that there's something it feels wrong with them. And here's the truth. While all of us can point to experiences here and there where we felt like we were on the outside, maybe because of something you said or you did or something that happened to you, maybe it's because you entered a different culture. At one point, you didn't look like everybody else. You didn't speak the language. You didn't know the customs. Maybe you've had moments where you felt like you had to speak the truth, and you did that, and that actually put you on the outside of the community. Or maybe you've just been through middle school. All of us know what it feels like to be marginalized or excluded from time to time. But here's the thing. And I hope that we don't take this for granted. What most of us in here don't know is what it feels like to exist on the outside of community all the time. To live your life alone because there's something about you that is somehow considered atypical or unacceptable, socially, culturally, religiously. An experience that sadly so many in our world today, including people here among us, live with. Well, today we have a very interesting interaction between Jesus and a person who has spent the majority of her adult life, if not all of it, living with a profound sense of social and religious shame. A woman whom we're told has lived with the humiliating and incurable condition of continuous menstrual bleeding. A condition that, according to the law of Moses, not only made her socially and religiously contaminated, but it also contaminated anyone who would come in contact with her. In other words, her condition, like so many others, was considered spiritually contagious. And if you're interested in the laws around this particular issue, you can go to the book of Leviticus, chapter 15. It is striking what you find in that chapter. So this woman was a liability to the community. If you touched anything that she touched, you were immediately defiled. So what this meant is that either she had to avoid everyone all the time or people avoided her. The impact, either way, was the same. Not only did she lose her health, but she also lost her future. She lost her income, which she spent on doctors, as we're told in the story, to no avail. She lost her dignity. She lost her community. And because of the specific religious purity laws, she effectively lost her access to God, because we know she was never permitted to enter the synagogue with her condition. So she was literally and metaphorically bleeding out. Sometimes I have these moments when I read stories like this, and I have to ask myself, what would this be like? I ask myself, like, what would this be like if this was my sister? Or if this was my mom? Or my daughter? Or my partner? What would that be like? Imagine how that would color your entire existence. The pain of being socially isolated like that, on top of already being sick. Or the pain of seeing your loved one experience that much isolation. So that's her. That's this woman in the story who, on this particular day, when Jesus is coming through town, she breaks all social and religious protocol by sneaking into the crowd that's pressing up against Jesus, hoping that if she just touches his garment, she'll be healed. Now, I just want to be super clear about something here. There is no way, given the stigma of her condition, that this woman would have ever expected to be allowed to come close enough to a Jewish rabbi, let alone expect to receive a healing touch, when touch itself is the problem, right? That's the issue. So she resorts to the only option society has left her. She comes up behind Jesus in secret. She reaches out her hand through the pressing crowd, and she touches Jesus' garment. A few years ago, we were interviewing candidates for our sexton position. Jesus and Dora, who were with us, had served in that position for close to 40 years. And now that they had retired, we were looking for a new sexton. And we had several wonderful candidates. One of them was this guy. He was amazing. We didn't hire him, but he had this dream of having a food truck at one day, and he already had his menu planned out. That was his big vision. He was trying to get his life, infrastructured to that end. And so we, got down to the final 3 candidates, and then we, as we always do a background check, and we asked them, is there anything that we need to know? So this one guy wanted us to know that when the background check comes back, there's going to be a couple of things on there that he said he wasn't proud of. Stealing food and starting a fire. And what we found out is that at one point in his life, he had been homeless. And so during that one period, which I think was about a year, he stole food once because he was hungry, and he started a contained fire because he was cold. So 2 criminal hits on his background check. And I remember thinking to myself, I agree that you shouldn't steal. And in general, I agree it's a good idea not to start fires in public places. But what do you do when the only way you can eat is to steal? And what do you do when the only way to keep warm is to start a fire? At what point does society have something to do when stealing becomes the only option someone has to eat? Like, at what point does that become our crime? You see, this is what I think actually sets Jesus apart from most other religious leaders of his day. And you'll see this over and over again once I point this out to you. But Jesus never points fingers at the individual. Isn't that so interesting? He never points fingers at the individual. Jesus always seems to be compassionate toward the individual, and instead, he critiques the priorities and the assumptions of society. The question isn't, is it okay to steal in order to eat? That's the question we tend to ask. The question Jesus would ask is, why are there hungry people among us? Isn't that amazing? The question isn't, is it right for this woman to steal her own healing without Jesus' consent, which in a different context might look like stealing medication? The question is, what is it about this society that has made it so that a child of God doesn't feel safe showing her face in public? The reason Jesus had different answers to social and religious issues is because he was asking different questions. Any other rabbi would have turned around and berated this poor woman for defiling him by touching his garments. Jesus says to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." Jesus looks at a person whom everyone else thought God had rejected, and he calls her daughter. Jesus looked at a person who had been denied access to the communal holy places, and he says, "Your faith has made you well." Jesus looked at a person who had forgotten what it was like to feel at home, either in society or in her own skin, and he says to her, "Go in peace." Some of you might remember hearing this past week, a story of a lady from Clinton, Maryland, who about 5 years ago found this vase on the clearance rack of a thrift store. And she herself had spent some time in Mexico, and she was like, "Oh, this looks just like a Mayan vase. It's really beautiful, and I think I'll buy this." $3.99 she bought this thing for 5 years ago. So this past January, she's in Mexico, and she goes to the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, and she sees these vases, and she's like, "My God, these look just like the one I have at home." Only to find out that this vase that she had found on the clearance rack for $3.99 actually dates back to somewhere between 200 and 800 AD. And so there's this whole long story of her repatriating this thing back to Mexico, and they did a whole celebration as they received it. And I love this quote by her. She said, "I'd like for it to go back to its rightful place where it belongs." And she added, "But I also want it out of my house because I have 3 little boys, and I was petrified that after 2,000 years, I would be the one to break it," which I thought was so funny and so true. So I love this story. It is startling how something of such great value could be so mistakenly undervalued that it would be placed on a clearance rack for $3.99. It's humorous when you think of that. On the one hand, a miscalculation like this doesn't happen very often. On the other hand, it happens all the time. It happens anytime we treat people like they belong on the clearance rack. Because of their gender, because of their sexuality or color of their skin, because of their income level or their education level, their mental health, their age, their criminal history, or any other classification that we've decided makes people less valuable. The gospel today, the message is actually really simple, and this is what I want to conclude with today. So if somebody tells you, "What's the message today?" What did Sari preach on? Here it is. Treat every human being like the treasure that they are. Treat every human being like the treasure that they are. Well, Sari, what if I disagree with someone and I think that their ideas are terrible for society? Okay, well, in that case, when you disagree with them, do it while valuing them like the treasure that they are. When someone ticks you off on the streets of Bethesda and you are just raging at them in the car, rage at them while valuing them like the treasure that they are. Treat every person like the treasure that they are. Will you say that with me? Treat every person like the treasure that they are. Not just because that's how Jesus treated us. Not just because it's the Christian way to live, but because it's true.